It started with a phone call. I remember exactly where I was, curled up on the couch with a mug of lukewarm chamomile tea, my laptop still open in front of me, filled with spreadsheets and sales reports I had promised myself I'd close an hour earlier. The rain tapped gently against the tall windows of my apartment in downtown Seattle, casting blurry shadows over the hardwood floors. It was a typical November evening, gray and quiet, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you wish for something warmer, something familiar. The kind of evening that, in past years, would have made me start thinking about going home for the holidays. When my phone buzzed and I saw my mom's name on the screen, I smiled without thinking. It wasn't that we were especially close, not in the way people describe daily calls and long heart-to-hearts, but there was comfort in hearing her voice, even when it was wrapped in thin layers of distance and unspoken things. "Hey Mom," I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear, already beginning to close down my laptop. "Hi sweetheart," she said, her voice light, almost too light. "How are you? Busy with work, I'm sure." "Yeah, end of quarter stuff." I paused, waiting for the usual exchange of polite updates, maybe even a hint of anticipation about Christmas plans. Instead, there was a short silence on the line and then she said it. "Well, I just wanted to touch base before the holidays. Your father and I have been sorting out the sleeping arrangements for Florida, and we've kind of run into a bit of a space issue." I didn't say anything at first, assuming this was leading up to some kind of reshuffling or perhaps an awkward joke about air mattresses and family chaos. But she went on, her tone still breezy, like this was just a minor logistical hiccup. With Kimberly and Eric bringing the kids and all, we've given them the big room upstairs. And your dad and I, of course, will be in the master. The twins will take the room by the patio, and we figured Eric's parents can have the guest room since they're joining for the new year. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, heart slowly sinking as I realized what she was saying, or rather what she wasn't saying. "So, where would I be?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Well, that's just it," she said, and I could hear her smile through the line, as if she was offering a solution instead of delivering a blow. "We didn't really have you in mind this year, darling. There just isn't a good space for you. I mean, we'd hate to have you on the couch for 2 weeks and you wouldn't be comfortable with all the kids around. It's going to be chaotic." My throat tightened. "You didn't have me in mind?" "Oh, don't take it that way," she replied quickly. "It's just with how everything lined up. And you're always so independent, aren't you? You'll be fine, I'm sure." I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone dry. I was always so independent. That phrase clung to me like a label I hadn't asked for. I had built a life around it. Moved across the country, worked my way up in a competitive field, learned how to be alone without being lonely. But in this moment, that independence felt like a punishment. I don't even remember how the rest of the conversation ended. I think I mumbled something about understanding and needing to get back to work. I must have said goodbye. I must have. But as I set the phone down, a weight settled in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I stared out the window at the wet streets below, the lights of the city blurring into little golden ghosts. Somewhere, cars moved through the night, people passed under umbrellas, life continued. But I sat frozen, the sound of her words playing over and over in my head. "There's no place for you. Not even a spot on the floor. Not even a passing concern for whether I'd feel excluded or hurt. Just a fact, delivered so easily as if I were an afterthought to my own family's plans. I had always known, on some level, that I occupied a different space in our family constellation. Kimberly was the golden child. Married, children, the perfect suburban life. My parents lit up when she called, hung her kids' drawings on their fridge, posted family photos online like we were all part of one happy unit. But I was the one who left. The one who chased a career, who sent Christmas gifts through the mail because flying home for 3 days didn't make sense. The one who called not because I had time but because I knew they expected it. Still, I never thought I'd be left out entirely. I didn't cry. That would come later, I think, in small moments. A commercial that hit too hard, a song on the radio, the quiet way I folded my pajamas that night and wondered why I suddenly felt like a child again, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, realizing home might never feel like home again. Instead, I poured myself another cup of tea, now cold and bitter, and stared at the ceiling, wondering what it meant to not belong anymore. Wondering if I ever truly had. Before I could fully process the initial sting of being left out, my mother's voice returned to my thoughts, cheerful and practical as always, like she hadn't just shoved me out of the family picture with a perfectly manicured hand. She'd said something else before hanging up, something meant to soften the blow, to patch over the deep crack she'd just made with a band-aid of suggestion. "Maybe this year, sweetheart, you can use the time for yourself. You work so hard. Why not save up and take a real vacation somewhere just for you? Treat yourself." The words had floated out of her mouth like confetti, light and fluttery, but to me, they landed with the heaviness of wet cement. Save up. Take a vacation for yourself. As if that was what I'd needed to hear, as if I hadn't spent my adult life doing exactly that. Saving, sacrificing, measuring every step against the weight of expectations no one even said aloud. As if I hadn't been holding it all together alone for years while still showing up when they needed me, remembering birthdays, mailing gifts to the kids I barely knew, sending polite texts and messages into a family thread that felt like a digital echo chamber where my presence barely registered. There was something cruel in the way she'd said it, though I knew she hadn't meant it that way. That was the worst part. It wasn't spiteful, it wasn't calculated. It was effortless. She honestly believed it was a kind and helpful suggestion, that I would hear her words and feel inspired, grateful even for being given permission to think about myself. But the truth was I had been thinking about them for so long, putting their needs, their plans, their holidays before my own, that I didn't even remember what it felt like to want something just for me without guilt. I hadn't been on a real vacation in years. Not because I couldn't afford it, not exactly, but because time off always meant heading home, buying a plane ticket, juggling schedules, sleeping on couches or in barely cleared guest rooms, nodding through stories about soccer practice and school plays, quietly watching from the sidelines as my family orbited around Kimberly's children like they were the only gravitational force that mattered. My presence was appreciated in the same way a family friend might be. Pleasant, optional, someone you thank for bringing a pie. And now, here was my mother, effectively saying that since there was no room for me in their plans, maybe I should find something else to do with myself, like a stray pet being redirected from the front porch. There was no pause to ask how I felt about not being included, no flicker of concern about whether I'd be alone for the holidays. No space made for even the simplest gesture of inclusion. Just a casual suggestion to save up and do something nice. I had done everything I thought I was supposed to. I had worked hard, climbed the ladder, smiled through the exhaustion, hit my quarterly goals, made sacrifices no one ever saw. I stayed late at the office, said yes to every opportunity, and made my own way through a world that wasn't built to hold soft places for women who didn't follow the expected path. I didn't get married. I didn't have children. I didn't give them grandchildren to gush over or framed family portraits to hang on their walls. But I sent cards. I remembered anniversaries. I flew in when I could, always bringing something, wine, gifts, energy. And still I was the one they forgot to include. Not because they didn't love me, I suppose, but because I wasn't essential. I wasn't necessary for the version of family they had built and cherished. My absence didn't leave a gap. If anything, it made things simpler. That realization didn't come all at once. It sank in slowly over the next few hours as I sat alone in my apartment, staring blankly at a screen filled with unread emails. I didn't cry at first. I told myself I was fine, that I didn't even like Florida, that it would be nice not to deal with the chaos of kids running through the house or sleeping in a noisy hallway. But beneath that thin layer of logic, something was unraveling. The part of me that had always waited for the day when I would be chosen, prioritized, seen, she finally understood. It wasn't going to happen. For my mother, my father, even for Kimberly, I had always been the easy one. The one who didn't need checking on. The one who handled things. I had made it too easy for them to forget that I still had needs. That I still wanted to be included. That I still hurt. Kept thinking about that phrase, save up. As if money was the thing stopping me from enjoying my life. As if what I lacked was not love or belonging or a place in the family, but a travel fund and better time management. I had money. I had time. What I didn't have, what I had never really had, was a place where I was wanted simply because I was me. Not because I was useful or polite or uncomplaining. The tea had gone cold again. I stood in my kitchen staring at the tiled backsplash like it could give me answers. My hands were clenched without realizing it, nails digging faint crescents into my palms. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the weight of everything I had buried under years of trying to be enough. It wasn't just the phone call. It wasn't just the holidays. It was every time I bit my tongue to keep the peace, every time I smiled through a disappointment, every time I told myself it didn't matter that no one asked how I was really doing. This was the drop that finally made the cup spill. I wasn't angry, at least not in the loud, fiery way anger is usually portrayed. What I felt was quieter, deeper. A tired, aching sorrow that settled in my bones and made the world seem dimmer. I realized I had been waiting my whole life for my family to turn around and reach out a hand to pull me in. And maybe they never would. Maybe they didn't know how. Or maybe they didn't even notice I was waiting. After I hung up the phone and sat alone in the stillness of my apartment, something in me began to crack. Not suddenly, but with a slow and familiar ache, like the way old floorboards creak beneath your feet after years of wear. At first, I told myself it was just this once, just this holiday, just an oversight. But the truth didn't stay quiet for long. It started rising, pressing itself against the surface of my thoughts, dragging with it memories I'd tried so hard to dismiss as coincidences or misunderstandings. And suddenly, painfully, I realized this wasn't the first time I had been pushed to the side. It was a pattern. It had always been a pattern. I remembered Kimberly's graduation trip. She was 17 and heading to the Caribbean with our parents as a celebration of finishing high school. I had been 15 watching her pack her bags while sitting on the edge of her bed, my fingers curled into the duvet cover like it might anchor me to some kind of inclusion. I asked with a tentative sort of hope if I would be going too. My mother had smiled, kindly I think, and said, "This is Kimberly's special time, honey. Yours will come." It didn't. When I graduated 2 years later, no one mentioned a trip. There was a dinner at a chain restaurant, a slice of dry chocolate cake, and a vague promise of something later that never came. I told myself it didn't matter, that things were different now, that money was tighter or timing was off. I forced myself to be grateful for what I had. I clapped for Kimberly's photos on the beach, smiled through her stories of snorkeling and boat rides, and packed away the envy like it was something shameful. Then there was Thanksgiving. God, that Thanksgiving. I had flown home from college, exhausted and carrying a suitcase that barely made it through baggage claim. The house was full as it always was, relatives, neighbors, kids running in every direction. My mother greeted me with distracted warmth, telling me Kimberly and Eric had arrived the night before and were already settled in the guest room. I waited for her to say where I would be sleeping, already bracing for an air mattress or a couch. But it was worse than that. She led me to the laundry room, the old one that had been turned into a cramped storage closet years before, and pointed to a narrow folding cot wedged between boxes of Christmas decorations and bins of outgrown baby clothes. "We just ran out of space," she said with a shrug, like I would understand, like it wasn't humiliating to be told there wasn't even a proper place for me to lay my head in the home where I had grown up. I'd lain awake that night with the scent of mothballs in my nose, staring at the outline of a snowman cookie tin above my head, pretending I was somewhere else. And Christmas, how could I forget? The year I had flown across the country, spending half my December bonus on last-minute flights and shipping gifts in advance. I arrived at the house to find it dark, the driveway empty. I checked my phone in confusion, scrolling through texts and emails until I found it. An old message weeks earlier where my mother had written that the family would be celebrating a week later this year, just easier with the kids' school schedules. No one had told me the date had changed. No one had thought to check that I was aware. I sat in my rental car in front of the house for nearly an hour, staring at the porch light that never came on. There had been other moments too, smaller perhaps, but just as sharp. The family reunion in South Carolina, where every hotel room had been booked except mine, and I ended up sleeping in the backseat of my rental car under a thin blanket while the rest of them laughed around bonfires and posed for group photos I was barely in. The birthday party where my name had been left off the cake. The wedding planning calls where I was asked to help but never truly invited in. The phone calls that came late as an afterthought after everyone else already knew. It was always something. Always just enough to remind me that I was separate. Peripheral. Convenient to exclude. I told myself for years that I was imagining it, that I was too sensitive, that my independence made people assume I didn't mind being left out. But I did. I minded more than I ever let on. And now, sitting there in the silence of my one-bedroom apartment, I could no longer convince myself it was just bad luck or forgetfulness. This wasn't an accident. This was how it had always been. The weight of it settled on my shoulders like something ancient and heavy, pressing into my ribs until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to rewind time and ask all the questions I never dared to ask before. Why wasn't I enough? Why was there always room for Kimberly, for her children, for her in-laws, but not for me? What had I done, or failed to do, that made me so easy to leave out? And the worst part was that no one in my family would see any of it. To them, these were harmless oversights, small practicalities, things that could be brushed off with a laugh or a vague apology. But to me, each one had been a tiny wound that never quite healed. And now, all those wounds had finally torn open, spilling years of quiet pain across the floor of my mind. This latest phone call wasn't the beginning. It was the final blow. The confirmation of everything I had tried not to believe. There really was no room for me, not just in the house in Florida but in the spaces that mattered. In the decisions, the memories, the plans. I wasn't part of the foundation. I was an afterthought, a name mentioned when someone remembered to do so, a seat added if there happened to be one left over. And the most devastating part of all was the realization that I had let it happen. I had spent years accepting scraps and calling them enough, convincing myself that love meant patience, that family meant sacrifice, that if I just kept showing up, eventually someone would save me a seat at the table without me having to ask. But they never did. And now I understood that they never would. The night had fallen quietly over Seattle, wrapping the city in its usual wet darkness. Outside my window, traffic moved in slow red streaks, headlights blurred by rain. The silence in my apartment was sharp, almost surgical, cutting through the thick thoughts in my head. I was still seated at the kitchen counter, untouched tea cold beside me, when the soft chime of a new email broke through the air. I reached for my phone, expecting another company update or an automated notice about a subscription renewal. Instead, I saw the subject line: End-of-year compensation and bonus update, confidential. My heart fluttered with something like reflexive stress, the kind that came with years of attaching my worth to numbers in emails like these. I opened it with the same detached instinct I always had, already prepared to see something modest, maybe slightly above average, the usual corporate thank you, dressed up in polite language and HR-approved metrics. But the number stopped me cold. $61,000. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly, waiting for some kind of catch to reveal itself. But there it was, real, official, unexpected. My bonus. $61,000. It took me a full minute before I could breathe properly again. I leaned back slowly, my eyes still locked on the numbers. A strange warmth began to rise in my chest. Not excitement, not yet, but something deeper, like the faint pulse of a part of me I had forgotten was still alive. This wasn't just a number. It wasn't just money. It was validation long overdue. It was a measure of everything I had given to my job. The late nights, the weekends sacrificed, the travel, the endless reports, the clients soothed, the deadlines met without fail. For years I had poured myself into work because it was the one place where effort seemed to matter, where results translated into something tangible. But I had never let myself feel proud. I had always redirected that pride into usefulness, offering to help out, to cover gaps, to be available when no one else was. For a moment my reflex kicked in. Maybe now, I thought, I could offer to rent a bigger place for the family next year. Somewhere with more rooms. Somewhere where I'd finally fit. Maybe this could be the year I proved I wasn't just successful but generous. Valuable. Needed. But the thought barely had time to form before something in me snapped. Not in anger but in a quiet, decisive shift, like a door closing softly behind me. No. I wasn't going to do that again. I wasn't going to turn this win, my win, into another attempt to buy my way into a space that was never meant for me. I wasn't going to spend this money trying to earn affection or carve out a spot in a house that had already decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers trembling just slightly, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of the moment. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I had the power to choose without guilt. To do something for myself. Not because it made sense or because it was practical or because someone else would benefit, but simply because I wanted to. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not this time. This money didn't need to be filtered through the lens of family obligations or holiday logistics. It didn't need to buy extra rooms or more comfort for people who wouldn't notice if I wasn't there. It could be mine. Entirely. Unapologetically. The realization was dizzying. I stood up, pacing the apartment in slow, careful steps, trying to let the truth of it settle inside me. I thought about all the things I had said no to over the years because they seemed too indulgent or too selfish. I had always chosen the sensible option, the quiet corner, the support role. I had always told myself that if I just worked harder, if I just stayed patient, someone would notice and say, "You belong." But no one had. And now I didn't need them to. I walked over to the window and pressed my hand to the cold glass. Below me the city glowed, damp and alive, indifferent and beautiful. I imagined what it would feel like to walk into a room, any room, knowing I had chosen it. Not as an afterthought or a compromise, but as a declaration. I imagined what it would be like to spend this money on something that made me feel whole again. Not included. Seen. Not tolerated, celebrated. Not just allowed to be there but fully, joyfully present in my own life. A kind of quiet power settled over me then. I hadn't asked for this bonus. I hadn't expected it. But maybe that was what made it feel so profound. It wasn't given because someone felt sorry for me or because I begged to be noticed. It was earned. And now it was mine to use in whatever way would heal something I hadn't even realized was so broken. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to wait for invitations that never came or plan my life around people who forgot to count me in. I was done asking for space in rooms that were too small to hold me. This time I would build something different. Something that didn't shrink to accommodate others. Something that looked like happiness on my own terms. The number glowed on the screen behind me, still surreal, still magnificent. $61,000. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet. But I knew one thing for certain. It would not be spent trying to earn my place in someone else's life. This time it would be spent on me. I sat in the golden silence of my apartment for a long time after reading that email, letting the truth of it wrap itself around me like the softest, warmest blanket. This time the future was mine to shape. Not in reaction to someone else's expectations, not in desperation to belong, but in full, intentional ownership of my own joy. I thought about all the ways I'd spent my life waiting. Waiting to be chosen, to be invited, to be remembered. And for the first time I didn't want to wait anymore. I wanted to choose myself. I wanted to choose joy, not the quiet, sensible kind I'd settled for, but real, vivid, radiant joy. The kind you feel on your skin, in your lungs, in your bones. My phone was still on the counter, the screen dark now like it too had exhaled. Without letting myself overthink it, I picked it up and scrolled to the contact that had always meant safety, laughter, and home in its truest form, Jen. Jen had been my best friend for more than a decade, the kind of person who never let me apologize for being myself. She had a loud laugh that filled every room, a heart that held space for people in the way I had always longed for from my own family, and a sense of humor that had pulled me back from the edge more times than I could count. Her husband, Jason, was kind and steady, always offering a place at the table without needing a reason. And their daughter Lily, 6 years old with wild curls and the brightest eyes, called me Auntie Marls, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They had never made me feel like a guest. With them I was simply included, as I was, no effort or performance required. They were the ones who noticed when I was quiet too long, who sent me soup when I was sick, who always remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders or calendar alerts. Over the years they had become my chosen family, though I had never said it out loud. Now I realized it was time. I tapped her name, heart racing in that strange way it does when you're about to say something that really matters. She picked up after the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. "Hey, everything okay?" And just like that, something inside me softened. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from the center of your chest. "I'm more than okay," I said. "But I need to ask you something." I could hear her moving, probably stepping away from wherever she was to give me her full attention. "Sure. What's going on?" I didn't try to ease into it. I didn't hedge or qualify or test the waters the way I usually did. I just told her the truth. "I got my bonus today. It was a lot more than I expected. And after everything that's happened with my family, I don't want to spend another holiday pretending I'm okay with being excluded. I want to do something that actually makes me happy. I want to go somewhere beautiful, somewhere warm, somewhere far away from all of this. And I don't want to go alone." There was a pause on the other end, not hesitation, just Jen listening in that deep, full-body way she always did. "So," I continued, my voice steady now, "I want to take you, Jason, and Lily to the Maldives. All expenses paid. 5-star everything. Villas over the water. Sunset dinners. The whole dream. I want to make new memories, new traditions. I want to spend the holidays with people who actually make me feel like I matter." I expected her to laugh or to tell me I was being ridiculous or that I didn't need to do something so extravagant. But she didn't. Instead, she was quiet for just a breath longer, and then her voice cracked softly when she spoke. "Marls, are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "I've spent too many years trying to fit into a family that doesn't want to make space for me. And I'm done. I want to be somewhere where I'm seen. Where I can wake up and not feel like I'm in the way. I want to give myself something good. And I want to share it with you. Because you're the people who've shown me love without me having to earn it." I heard her sniffle lightly and then a little laugh, the kind that comes out when you're overwhelmed and trying not to cry. "Jason's going to lose his mind," she said. "And Lily, she's going to tell everyone in kindergarten that she's going to a magic island." "She's not wrong," I said, grinning now, the joy finally rising to the surface. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything in my life." In the hours that followed, we talked non-stop. Laughing, dreaming, Googling resorts and flights, picking between places with infinity pools and floating breakfasts and spa bungalows built over clear turquoise water. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't planning something around someone else's approval or availability. I wasn't hoping to be included in a plan someone else had already made. I was making the plan. I was building the memory. I was choosing the people who had chosen me over and over again in ways big and small. That night as I lay in bed, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. There was no guilt, no second-guessing. Just quiet excitement and a growing lightness in my chest. I wasn't running away, I was stepping into something new. Something that didn't come with conditions or compromise. The Maldives would be more than a vacation. It would be a declaration. That I deserved beauty. That I deserved love. That I didn't need to keep waiting for someone else to give me permission to feel whole. I could give that to myself. And I would. The morning after that call with Jen, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, that doesn't wait for approval. It just arrives, sits in your chest like certainty and dares you to act on it. The gray Seattle sky outside hadn't changed, but something inside me had. I made coffee slowly, savoring the way the scent filled the kitchen, and then sat down at my laptop, opened a blank browser tab and typed a word I never imagined would apply to me: Maldives. The first images that came up nearly took my breath away. White sand so soft it looked like flour, water so clear it bordered on surreal. The soft blue of sky meeting the sea with no harsh lines, just endless warmth. I scrolled through photos of overwater villas with private plunge pools and wide wooden decks that opened straight into the ocean. I looked at bungalows where you could see stingrays drifting beneath the floorboards. It felt like something out of a dream I didn't realize I was allowed to have. I opened 10 tabs. Then 20. I read reviews, compared resorts, studied the layout of the islands. And then finally I found it. A quiet corner of a private atoll. A resort so tucked away it promised silence, space and privacy. Something sacred. Their overwater villas looked like miniature sanctuaries. Curved wooden beams, linen canopies, wide glass walls that let the sun rise in without resistance. I picked the biggest one. Not out of ego but out of something more radical. Self-worth. I selected a villa with 2 bedrooms, a large open-air living space, a private infinity pool that poured into the sea, and a netted lounge suspended above the water. Somewhere Lily could sit and count fish or let her hair blow wild in the wind. The booking screen came up and for a moment, my finger hesitated above the mouse. But only for a moment. Then I clicked confirm. And just like that it was real. Not an escape. Not a compromise. Not a plan that revolved around anyone else's convenience. This was mine. From there the details started pouring out of me like water over stone. Natural, unstoppable. I researched kids' activities and found a marine biology center that offered dolphin watching tours and coral reef classes for children. I emailed them directly and arranged a private snorkeling lesson for Lily, complete with a little certificate and a custom mask in her favorite color. I found a photography team at the resort and booked a sunset photo shoot for the 4 of us, imagining her in a cotton sundress, wind in her curls, her parents glowing beside her. I booked a private cruise on a dhoni, a traditional Maldivian sailboat, with dinner under the stars, candles flickering on the deck, soft music in the background. And I reserved a surprise spa morning for Jen and me, something luxurious and quiet, just for the 2 of us, because she had spent years pouring love into everyone else, and I wanted her to be held for once. Each booking felt like something more than logistics. It felt like recovery. Like sewing pieces of myself back together. There was no anxiety in the planning, no mental gymnastics to avoid disappointing someone. Every detail I chose was a conscious step away from the version of me who had once accepted less, who shrank herself to fit the available space, who thought being grateful meant not asking for more. Now I was claiming space. I was saying I deserve beauty. I deserve peace. I deserve to feel proud of the life I'm building. I found myself smiling, really smiling as I created a folder on my desktop titled, Our Paradise. I filled it with PDFs of confirmations, screenshots of villa layouts, weather forecasts, notes about customs and language and time zones. I made a checklist not because I had to, but because I wanted to savor the experience of preparing. It was the first time I had ever truly planned something that was entirely rooted in joy, not obligation. No one was going to ask me to sleep in a laundry room. No one was going to forget to tell me the date had changed. There was no fear of being an afterthought, no subtle shuffling to make room for someone else's comfort at the expense of mine. In the evenings I FaceTimed Jen and Lily, sharing details bit by bit. Lily squealed when I showed her a photo of the kids' beach club and asked if mermaids lived there. Jen teared up when I showed her the sunset cruise menu, her voice catching on a simple heartfelt thank you. But I didn't want thanks. I just wanted presence. To feel fully the reality of a life that wasn't built from leftovers and compromises, but from intention and care. And maybe the most surprising thing was how easy it became to breathe in this new space of confidence. I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't over-explaining. I didn't feel the need to justify my choices to anyone. Every email sent, every box checked, every dollar spent was a gentle, steady affirmation. I have power. I have taste. I have agency. And I no longer need to shape my desires to fit into someone else's mold. In booking a trip, I had begun to unlearn years of invisibility. I had started to believe that the life I wanted wasn't too much, wasn't selfish, wasn't excessive. It was possible. It was within reach. And I had reached for it finally without shame. This wasn't just preparation. It was healing. This was what it looked like when a woman who had been told to wait finally said yes to herself. Not later. Not maybe. Not when it's more convenient for others. But now. Now and without apology. The messages started coming in a few days after I finalized everything. They were exactly what I expected, wrapped in the familiar tone of vague concern and veiled judgment, the kind of language that tiptoes just far enough into guilt without saying anything direct. First it was my mother. We'll miss you this year. Maybe next time we can plan something that works for everyone. No mention of the phone call. No acknowledgement that I hadn't been included in the first place. Just a soft rewrite of history as if I had made the choice to exclude them. Then a day later, a shorter message from my father. It's too bad you won't be with us. We're trying to make it special for everyone. Again, the implication hanging between the words like damp laundry, we're doing our part and you're the one choosing otherwise. I read them both in silence, my thumb hovering over the screen not to reply, but simply absorbing how easily they turned absence into fault. In the past, I would have written back almost immediately, explaining, softening, apologizing without using the word sorry. I would have tried to smooth things over to reassure them that I still cared, that I wasn't angry, that I understood how complicated things were. I would have done anything to avoid being seen as cold or ungrateful. But this time I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Not because I was hurt and wanted to punish them. But because I had nothing to explain. I didn't owe them comfort for a decision I had made for my own well-being. I didn't need to cushion the truth or wrap it in justifications. For the first time my silence wasn't a retreat. It was a boundary. I set my phone down on the table beside me and felt the stillness in my body, the lack of anxiety, the absence of that old automatic pressure to make things right. It was like stepping out of a suit that never quite fit, shedding the layer of constant vigilance that came with trying to stay lovable in a family that only seemed to notice me when I stepped out of line. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was distance, and not the kind that hurt. The kind that heals. The kind that gives you room to breathe your own air, to hear your own thoughts without their voices filtering in, soft and layered with disappointment disguised as affection. There had been a time when those messages would have ruined me. When a single line from my mother, passive-aggressive and perfectly timed, would have sent me into hours of doubt. When a reply from my father, cool and brief, would have made me feel like I was failing some invisible test I didn't know I was taking. But now, I simply let the words sit in my inbox, unread past the preview line, slowly sinking beneath the weight of more important things. Confirmation emails from the resort, weather updates for Molly, messages from Jen about sun hats and swimsuits, and Lily's excitement over building sandcastles. Their absence from my holiday plans didn't feel like a hole anymore. It felt like relief. The realization washed over me quietly but thoroughly. I didn't need their approval to feel whole. I didn't need their understanding to validate my choices. I didn't even need their presence to feel loved. Because I had finally chosen myself. There was power in that silence. It wasn't cold or empty. It was full of clarity. Full of every time I had tried to earn a place I already deserved. Full of the years I had kept shrinking to fit, thinking that if I made myself smaller, more helpful, more agreeable, I would finally be invited in. And now, by not answering, I was finally answering in the most honest way possible. I won't beg for space anymore. I won't soften the truth just to make you more comfortable. I won't explain what should have been obvious. Their words would keep coming, I knew that. Eventually someone would try again, maybe with more guilt, maybe with less. But it didn't matter. I had stopped looking for resolution in a place where there had never been room for me to grow. This wasn't about punishment. This was about peace. And peace, I had learned, is sometimes just choosing not to answer. The moment we stepped off the seaplane, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies where someone gasps at the sight of paradise and bursts into tears. No, it was quieter than that, like something long forgotten finally exhaled. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus, and the wind didn't push or sting. It wrapped itself around me gently, warm and welcoming, like it had been waiting. The resort staff greeted us with chilled towels and cold drinks infused with lime and mint. And even though I'd read all the reviews and seen every photo twice, nothing could have prepared me for how it all felt. The water was impossibly blue, a color so pure it almost made my eyes ache. The sand was so white and soft it looked like sugar, and the villas stretched out over the ocean like a dream made solid. Each one with its own path, its own little world. When we arrived at ours, I opened the heavy wooden door and stood still for a moment, just taking it in. The glass floor panels revealed fish drifting below, their silver bodies catching light like living coins. The rooms smelled faintly of sandalwood and sea. The linens were crisp, the light filtered and golden. Everything was calm. Everything was mine. Lily raced in ahead of us, barefoot, squealing with delight, her curls bouncing as she ran across the deck to see if the water really was as warm as it looked. She leaned over the edge, already chattering to the fish below. Jen followed her with a laugh, dropping her bag and sighing with something like disbelief. And Jason just stood beside me in quiet awe, shaking his head like he couldn't believe this place was real. That first evening, we dined barefoot in the sand just a few feet from where the waves kissed the shoreline. The table was set with lanterns, the food delicate and perfect. Fresh seafood, bright mango, cool coconut cream. But it wasn't the food or even the scenery that made something inside me soften. It was the way we talked. Naturally, easily, without pretense. There were no roles to perform, no expectations to meet. Jen asked how I'd been really, and when I told her, she listened, not with pity but with presence. Jason poured more wine without a word, offering comfort in the way he always did, quiet, steady, loyal. Lily built a tiny castle in the sand beside us and named it Marley Town, declaring it a magical island where only the kindest people live. Every day that followed was a slow unfolding, a gentle shedding of tension I hadn't even known I carried. I woke each morning to the sound of waves lapping beneath the bungalow, sunlight pouring in through the floor, painting the ceiling with shimmering patterns that danced with the movement of the sea. We swam until our limbs were heavy with salt, our skin warm and golden. We snorkeled through coral gardens where schools of fish moved like living brushstrokes. We laughed. So much laughter. Not the kind that fills space awkwardly, but the real kind, the kind that comes from feeling safe. One afternoon, I lay on the netted hammock stretched over the ocean, eyes half closed, the sound of Lily singing in the background and Jen's voice drifting from inside as she and Jason made tea. And in that moment, something happened that I still can't explain fully. It was like every version of me that had ever tried too hard, that had bent herself into someone else's shape, finally let go. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was whole. My body felt light, not in the physical sense but in the way you feel when nothing is pulling you down anymore. I had always thought of peace as something distant, something to earn or negotiate. But lying there, the breeze brushing my face, the sun warming my legs, I realized it was much simpler. It was this. Being exactly where I wanted to be, with people who saw me clearly and loved me anyway. No performance. No proving. No waiting. This wasn't a vacation. It wasn't an escape. It was something entirely new. A beginning not from loss but from choice. I wasn't filling a gap or numbing a pain. I was living a life that felt like mine, not borrowed or conditional or halfway permitted. I was building something. One evening, during the golden hour when the sky turned the color of ripe peaches and the sea mirrored every shade, we had the photo session. Lily wore a cotton dress and carried a flower crown she insisted I help her make. Jen and Jason held hands like newlyweds. And me, standing barefoot on the edge of that deck, wind in my hair, ocean behind me, I looked into the lens and didn't recognize the woman I saw. Not because she was different but because she finally looked whole. Later I scrolled through the previews and there was one photo that caught my breath. I wasn't smiling for anyone else. My shoulders were relaxed, my eyes soft, my mouth slightly open like I was about to laugh. And I could see it. For the first time. I was home. Not in a place but in myself. It was the fourth evening on the island, and the light was that soft golden shade that only seems to exist just before the sun dips beneath the horizon, turning the water into a sheet of melted copper. I sat on the deck, my feet dangling over the edge, the sea gently swaying beneath me, the air rich with the scent of salt and frangipani. Jen and Jason were inside, helping Lily with one of the postcards she was determined to send to everyone she had ever met. And for the first time since we'd arrived, I found myself opening my phone, not out of habit or distraction, but from a place of quiet clarity. My gallery was full, photos and short videos of this world we had created for ourselves. Laughter at dinner as Lily tried to teach the waiter a made-up song. The clink of glasses as the sun disappeared into the horizon. The three of them splashing in the water while I filmed from the hammock, my own laugh carried faintly by the breeze. There was one clip that stood out. Jason had filmed it without me noticing. I was standing alone on the beach, my back to the camera, long skirt trailing in the surf, arms loose at my sides. I wasn't posing. I wasn't performing. I was just breathing. It didn't feel like content. It felt like truth. So I chose that video. I added music. Something quiet, warm like the moment itself. And then, just before posting it, I typed a single sentence as the caption. When you stop trying to fit into someone else's life, you begin building your own. I didn't overthink it. I didn't craft it for reaction. I didn't anticipate anything beyond what I felt. Peace. I posted it and closed the app. I went back inside, where Lily handed me a postcard addressed to Auntie Marls in Paradise. I laughed, scooped her up and didn't think about my phone again for the rest of the evening. The next morning I opened it to check the weather and saw it immediately, the notifications spilling across my screen like a warning. Missed calls. Dozens of texts. Group chat pings. Even a voicemail from my mother, which she never left unless she wanted control over tone. My stomach didn't twist the way it used to. I just stared at the screen and waited for the emotion to arrive. But there was only stillness. The messages were exactly what I expected. Accusations laced in guilt, confusion pretending to be concern, anger disguised as hurt. From my sister. Wow. Really mature Marley. Couldn't just say it to our faces? From my mother. We always tried our best to include you. That video was unkind and unnecessary. Family is never perfect. From my father, simply disappointed. And then more, longer, louder, sharper. References to my selfishness, my sudden coldness, how I had changed. They were trying to pull me back in the only way they knew how, through shame, through rewriting, through turning the mirror back onto me. And maybe once it would have worked. Maybe once I would have sat there, panicked, typing a careful explanation, apologizing for how it came across, softening the edges of my truth to protect their version of events. But not now. I didn't respond. I read them once, slowly, let the words enter and pass through me without sticking. I didn't delete them. I didn't block anyone. I didn't engage. I simply placed the phone back down on the nightstand and walked outside into the sun. There was no satisfaction in ignoring them, no triumph. Just peace. A stillness in my chest that told me I had finally stopped asking for permission to feel what I felt. I had said nothing untrue. I had named no names. I had only spoken the truth of my experience, and it was not my fault if it made someone else uncomfortable. I had spent years shrinking to avoid that discomfort. I wasn't doing it anymore. On the deck, the wind caught the sheer curtains, lifting them gently. The sea below glittered like a secret. Behind me, I could hear Lily's tiny feet hitting the wooden floors, her laughter already rising toward me. Jen appeared in the doorway with coffee, her eyes still soft with sleep, and when she looked at me she didn't ask about the messages. She didn't need to. I had chosen this. I had chosen myself. And for once, no amount of noise could take that away. The return home was quiet in all the ways I needed it to be. Seattle was gray again, wet and cold in that heavy November way, but after the stillness of the ocean, the softness of the Maldivian breeze, and the echo of real laughter still ringing in my chest, the rain didn't bother me. My suitcase sat half unpacked by the front door, grains of white sand still clinging to the seams of my sandals. I made tea and left the lights off in the apartment, content to sit with the gentle rhythm of home, my home, without needing to be anywhere, say anything or explain myself. But the silence didn't last long. The messages were waiting for me, stacked one on top of another like the rising tide, intrusive and insistent. I saw them the moment I turned on my phone to check my flight receipt. First, my mother. You should be ashamed. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You've always been dramatic, but this was cruel. I don't know who you are anymore. I don't recognize you. Selfish. Ungrateful. That's what you've become. Then Kimberly. I don't care what happened, you don't humiliate your family online. You crossed a line. You need to apologize, not for our sake but for the sake of peace. For the sake of Lily seeing what grace looks like. You can't just cut us off because you're hurt. Grow up. And finally, my father. There's always been a limit to how much a family can take. You've gone too far. You've made your point. It's time to come back to reality. You've made yourself clear, but at what cost? Each word hit with the precision of someone who knows exactly where to land the blow, not out of cruelty but out of deeply rooted entitlement. They didn't see their messages as weapons. They saw them as correction, as parenting, as guidance. And that was the hardest truth of all. They truly believed they were right. That I had simply gone astray. That I owed them a return to the person they were more comfortable with. The quieter version of me, the accommodating one, the grateful one who smiled and nodded and bent. But I couldn't be her anymore. Not after the silence I'd felt in that hammock. Not after the way the ocean had taught me what real stillness meant. Not after the sound of Lily's laughter echoing through that villa-like music. I had finally felt what it was like to breathe without holding tension in my spine. I wasn't about to trade that freedom for their version of order. I didn't write back right away. I let myself feel everything first. The heat behind my eyes, the sting of those familiar words trying to find their old purchase inside me. But they couldn't. Not fully. Not anymore. Because I finally understood something that had taken me almost 3 decades to learn. Choosing myself wasn't betrayal. It was survival. It was truth. I opened a new message and wrote slowly, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the kind of calm that only comes when you stop trying to explain yourself to people who have no intention of listening. I'm not asking for forgiveness for choosing myself. That was it. No qualifiers. No soft endings. No extra padding to ease the blow. Just the truth. My truth. I stared at the sentence for a long moment before hitting send. Then I opened the message thread with my mother and blocked her. I did the same with Kimberly. With my father. With the family group chat that had gone silent for months and suddenly exploded when they felt their version of the story was being challenged. I blocked them all. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. Because I finally saw the pattern for what it was. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted obedience. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me to undo the one thing I had done purely for myself. And I couldn't go back to that version of me. She didn't live here anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a space reclaimed. A door closed gently, firmly, without drama. I stood in my apartment holding my phone with shaking hands, not because I was scared, but because I was free. I felt the weight of years falling off my back in slow, steady pieces. I was no longer at war with myself. I had chosen me. And for once I didn't feel guilty for doing so. I felt whole. For the first time in my adult life, my phone stayed silent. Not the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm, not the tense hush of someone waiting for an apology or building a case. Just pure, unbroken stillness. No pings in the morning, no check-ins, no sharp words hidden behind fake concern, no subtle attempts to remind me where I was supposed to belong. And what surprised me most wasn't the silence itself, but how peaceful it felt. I had always assumed that quiet would feel like abandonment, that the absence of messages and calls would wrap itself around my ribs like a vice, that I'd feel hollow or aching, counting the days until I was forgiven, welcomed back, restored to the version of myself they preferred. But instead I woke up to sunlight through my windows, the soft sound of the city outside, the warmth of my own breath steady in the morning light, and I didn't feel empty. I felt free. There was no expectation waiting for me in that silence. No wait. No role I had to slip into. I didn't have to edit my words, adjust my tone, or anticipate reactions. I didn't have to shape my experiences to fit someone else's narrative. I didn't owe anyone an update or an explanation. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I started using that stillness like space that had finally been cleared, space to build something new, not out of rebellion or grief but out of joy. I booked a solo trip to Lisbon not because I needed to run, but because I wanted to see what it felt like to walk cobblestone streets with no one else's agenda guiding my steps. I wandered through markets smelling of grilled sardines and citrus, listened to fado singers on quiet side streets, drank vinho verde on rooftops, and watched the sky shift over the river until the city lights began to flicker. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had myself, and for once that was enough. Back home, I found pleasure in simple rituals I'd never made time for before. I started cooking, really cooking. Not just heating up things at the end of a long day but choosing recipes with care, filling my kitchen with the scent of garlic and rosemary, watching dough rise under a clean towel like something sacred. I'd pour a glass of wine, put on a record, and dance barefoot between the stove and the sink, smiling to no one in particular. Weekends became softer. I started hiking again, something I hadn't done in years. I let my body move through forests without urgency, letting the dirt paths and tall pines pull me back into something older, slower, real. I'd sit on boulders at the edge of alpine lakes, legs dangling, wind in my hair, and feel the kind of silence that isn't empty at all, but full of water lapping at the rocks, birds calling in the distance, the rhythm of my own breath returning to its rightful pace. I spent time with the people who made me feel light. Jen, Jason, Lily, and others I had pushed aside for years out of obligation to people who never made space for me. I hosted dinners where we laughed until our ribs hurt, where no one played a part, where I didn't have to filter myself for fear of being called too sensitive or difficult. I remembered how easy it was to love and be loved when love didn't come with conditions. Every now and then I'd catch myself waiting, just for a second, for a notification, a message, a familiar name to flash across my screen. But it never came. And eventually I stopped waiting altogether. The absence of noise became the sound of safety, of boundaries respected, of peace earned. I didn't miss the drama. I didn't miss the quiet resentment, the performative conversations, the careful balancing act of never being too much but always being available. I didn't miss the cycle of being hurt and then expected to apologize for it. I didn't miss fighting to be seen. In that silence I found a version of myself I had forgotten. A woman who didn't need approval to feel whole. A woman who could fill her own days with meaning, who didn't confuse chaos with connection. A woman who knew that peace wasn't found in the absence of noise, but in the presence of truth. This silence, the one that once terrified me, had become the foundation of something real. And every day I lived within it, I built something stronger, softer. It had been just over a year since I blocked them, since I made the quiet final choice to no longer offer myself up for correction, explanation, or approval. In that time my life had changed, not with dramatic flourishes, but with slow, steady movement toward something softer and more honest. I had created space for joy without guilt. I had stopped measuring my days by how well I managed other people's comfort. The silence had become familiar, even comforting, and I had no desire to reopen doors I had so deliberately closed. So when my phone rang one quiet Tuesday afternoon and I saw the name Brian, Kimberly's husband, I stared at the screen, unsure if I was imagining it. I hadn't heard from him since before the rupture, and even then our interactions had always been polite, surface level, marked by the cautious distance of someone who married into the chaos but didn't speak against it. His name on my screen was so unexpected that I let it ring twice before answering, curiosity pressing heavier than hesitation. Brian. I said, my voice neutral. Hey, yeah, hi. It's Brian, he replied, sounding a little out of breath, like he hadn't planned what to say but had to say something. I hope this isn't a bad time. I told him it was fine, though my heart was already thudding with a familiar edge, not fear but a kind of guarded bracing, like stepping onto ground that had cracked before. He didn't waste time. I needed to call you. To say something I should have said a long time ago. And I'm not calling on anyone's behalf, just mine. I said nothing, letting him fill the space. I left Kimberly, he continued, his voice low but steady. 6 weeks ago. I filed for divorce. I didn't move. I barely blinked. Not because I was shocked, but because something about his tone told me this wasn't the whole story yet. She doesn't know I'm calling you, he added quickly. And this isn't about her, not really. It's about you. Or maybe, it's about what you did. What you chose. I sat down slowly, placing the phone on speaker and folding my hands in my lap, letting the words come to me. I watched what happened last year, he said. The post. The silence after. The way your family reacted. I was there, on the sidelines. I heard them calling you selfish. Saying you were trying to cause drama. But all I kept thinking was, she got out. There was a pause, a sharp breath. I didn't even realize how deep I was in it. Not fully. You know how it is with them. Everything's about perception. Control wrapped in concern. Expectations passed off as love. And if you don't perform the right version of yourself, you're the problem. You're ungrateful. Difficult. Negative. I closed my eyes, nodding even though he couldn't see me. For years I convinced myself it was just stress. That Kimberly was tired or overwhelmed. But it wasn't just her. It was all of them. And it wasn't stress, it was control. I wasn't allowed to be tired. I wasn't allowed to disagree. If I set boundaries, I was selfish. If I asked for space, I was punished. Quietly, skillfully, like a slow erosion of self. His voice caught there. Not with tears, he wasn't crying, but with something deeper. Weariness. The sound of someone who had carried too much for too long. I watched you stop responding. And for the first time I saw someone just not play along. You didn't yell. You didn't argue. You just chose peace. And that shook me. I kept going back to that one post. About not fitting into someone else's life. About building your own. Sat with me for months. I didn't even like it, didn't comment, didn't say anything. But it stayed with me. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over me like soft earth. I hadn't posted for attention. I hadn't imagined it would ripple beyond my own breath. But here it was. It gave me permission, he said almost in a whisper now. Permission to leave. To want something different. To believe that peace was a choice. You choosing yourself made me realize I hadn't chosen myself in years. I let the silence stretch between us. Not awkward, just full. He didn't owe me this call. But something in him clearly needed to say it out loud. To name what had shifted. I'm not asking for anything, he added gently. I just needed you to know that your choice changed more than your life. It changed mine too. I took a deep breath, pressing my palm lightly to my chest as if to calm the quiet thunder there. I hadn't prepared for this kind of full-circle moment. And maybe that was the beauty of it. That healing, real healing, doesn't just stay inside you. It radiates even when you don't mean for it to. It becomes something bigger than your own survival. Thank you, I said finally, simply. And I meant it. For the call. For the honesty. For reminding me that sometimes when you choose peace for yourself, you light the path for someone else to find their way out too. It was a cold, brittle Sunday afternoon when I saw the message from Ellie, my cousin on my father's side, someone I hadn't spoken to in months but who had always held a quiet, observant presence at family gatherings. She was never loud, never one to insert herself into family drama, but she noticed everything. She had the kind of eyes that looked past the noise and saw what no one else dared to say out loud. Her message was short at first, just a simple, "Can we talk? There's something I think you should know." I hesitated, but only briefly. There was something in her tone that wasn't casual, and I trusted her instinct. I called her, and she answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting for the silence to break. "Hey," she said softly. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you'd want to." "It's okay," I said, already bracing myself, though I wasn't even sure for what. "What's going on?" And then, like a slow unraveling, she began to tell me everything. Not in one explosive confession, but in a quiet, measured recounting, like someone describing a building slowly sinking into the earth. Inevitable, sad, and strangely calm. After Brian left Kimberly, everything in the family shifted. Not suddenly but undeniably. The image of her as the golden daughter, the perfect wife, the accomplished mother, the one who always had her life together, began to fracture. People noticed her temper more. Her need to control everything. The way she twisted conversations until everyone else felt like the problem. Brian, it turned out, had just been the first to say it aloud. Others started noticing what had always been there beneath the polished surface. My mother didn't take it well. Ellie told me that she spiraled in a way no one expected. Calls at odd hours, long rants about loyalty and shame, questions about where she went wrong as a mother. But there was no introspection, no real grief, just panic. A frantic clinging to the idea of the family she had spent decades trying to curate, now crumbling at the edges. She started isolating, withdrawing from friends, even skipping her usual holiday plans, unable to bear the thought of Kimberly showing up to Christmas alone. My father, as he always had, simply pulled away. Not with rage, not with confrontation, but with silence. The same silence he had used for years to keep himself above it all. He stopped answering calls regularly. He didn't show up to Thanksgiving. When asked, he just said he was tired, that he didn't want to be in the middle of everything, that people should work it out on their own. But his absence was louder than any argument could have been. The family, Ellie said, stopped celebrating holidays together altogether. No one wanted to host. No one wanted to pretend. The group chat had gone cold. Plans were made in smaller circles, behind backs, with the energy of obligation rather than joy. The perfect picture had cracked and no one could figure out how to hold it together anymore. I sat listening, not with satisfaction because none of it felt like revenge, but with a strange, aching clarity. The roles we had all been assigned weren't just about behavior. They were about control. Kimberly had been exalted not because she was flawless, but because she fit. Because she played her part. I had been cast as the difficult one not because I was worse, but because I wouldn't shrink. Because I asked questions. Because I didn't perform. And then Ellie said something that landed so sharply I had to close my eyes to steady myself. You know, she said, her voice lower now, more personal, they did the same to me. Not as loud maybe, but it was always there. I didn't get married. I moved away. I didn't show up with a story they could brag about. And after a while they just stopped asking. They'd talk about everyone else and I'd sit there invisible. I thought I was imagining it. For years. I thought I was the problem. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, steady but thick. But when you posted what you did, when you walked away and didn't explain yourself, Marley, it made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like there was a name for it. Like there were others. I didn't speak right away. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my heart full and heavy all at once. Because I had spent so long believing I was alone in it. In the strange weight of being treated like too much and not enough all at once. I had thought I was the only one who had to earn her place again and again, only to find it already taken. But I wasn't. Ellie was proof. And maybe there were more of us, scattered in corners, dimmed versions of ourselves, still trying to be small enough to stay. They taught us that love was something we had to earn, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. And that if we didn't perform it correctly, we didn't deserve it. Yes, she said. Exactly. And in that moment, the ground under everything I had believed about our family shifted again, not violently but permanently. The myth had collapsed. The one where we were broken for not fitting, for not being easy, for not folding into the family script. The truth was, the script had never left room for anyone outside the lead roles. And when the spotlight shifted, even the so-called stars lost their footing. I hung up the phone not with sadness but with a deep, strange calm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was simply done. Not just with them, but with the idea that their story had been the only one worth believing. I hadn't broken the family. I had just stopped pretending it was whole. A year later, my life feels like a different landscape. One I didn't stumble into but one I designed with deliberate, patient hands. I'm now vice president of strategic growth at the company where I once stayed late to prove my worth in silence, where I used to keep my head down and let others speak louder, take up more space, claim credit for what I'd built. But not anymore. Now I walk into rooms without shrinking. I speak without cushioning my words in apology. I sit at the table not because someone allowed me to but because I earned it, and because I claimed it without waiting for permission. My voice has changed. Not in volume but in weight. It doesn't tremble when I disagree. It doesn't hesitate to say no. It no longer carries the echo of a girl who once measured every word for its likability. I don't explain myself the way I used to. I don't soften my success to make it digestible. I don't say sorry before I ask for what's mine. There's a different kind of peace in my days now. Not just the absence of conflict but the presence of alignment. The people in my life now are the ones who see me clearly and stay anyway. Jen and Jason remain my anchor, not out of duty but from something more sacred. Choice. Our connection is steady, effortless, real. And Lily is growing taller, bolder, her laugh still loud enough to fill a room, her love still so pure it disarms me. We spend weekends together not because we're filling space, but because we genuinely enjoy the rhythm of each other's lives. Sometimes it's long brunches and lazy afternoons at the farmer's market. Sometimes it's messy dinners in my apartment, where Lily sits cross-legged on my couch, brushing glitter glue onto paper, asking endless questions about the stars and where turtles sleep. Sometimes it's just stillness, reading the same book on opposite ends of the couch, knowing that presence doesn't always need sound. I don't think about the past the way I used to. It doesn't pull at me anymore. It doesn't haunt my mornings or sting in the quiet moments. I no longer mourn the family I thought I had because I understand now. It was never real, at least not in the way I needed it to be. What I grieved for wasn't the loss of love, but the absence of what should have been. And once I let go of the illusion, there was nothing left to miss. My life now isn't loud or flashy. It's grounded, intentional. It's built on slow Sundays, chosen laughter, long hikes that remind me how steady my feet have become. It's in the way I make my coffee, strong without sugar, exactly how I like it. In the way I no longer feel the need to prove anything just to be loved. In the way I know deeply and without question that love without conditions is not a fantasy. It just had to be found outside the places I was told it would live. This isn't a story about revenge. It never was. It's not about who was right or who was wrong. It's about release. It's about freedom. It's about deciding that my life doesn't need to be shaped by the silence of others or by the roles they once handed me like a script. I threw that script away. I stopped performing. And when I did, I realized I wasn't difficult. I was just never meant to be small. One afternoon, as we were walking through the aquarium, Lily slipped her hand into mine and tilted her head up to me with that look she always has before she asks something big. "Auntie Marls," she said, "when are we going back to the little house with the fish under the floor?" I looked at her, her eyes wide, her voice full of that same wonder I had once buried in myself, and I smiled. Not because I had the answer in that moment, but because I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could say yes now. I could say yes to beauty, to freedom, to choosing joy again and again without asking for permission, without negotiating my worth. Because now I write my own story. And this time I don't apologize for the way it begins or for where it's going.